Well, hey, today we are going to talk about sensory processing as it relates to the nervous system, what it is, and how do we support it. But before we jump into that, are you new to my channel? If so, welcome. Make sure that you subscribe and have those notifications on because I release videos all the time and I don't want you to miss out. But let's jump right in today to the topic. I'm a survivor. I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna stop. I really wanted to talk about sensory processing as it relates to the nervous system because I find that most don't understand what's underneath the hood of a car. It's like we go to school, we learn all the different subjects, but yet we have never truly been prepared to understand how our brain and our body works, which ends up equating to mental health. If we don't understand what's going on under the hood, how the heck are we going to be able to support our brain and body into health? So I'm going to give you a definition, just a basic understanding of what sensory processing is. This is the process by which we, and I'm going to use my hands for it, we receive information through our 8 senses. Then we organize it in our brain and use it to participate in everyday activities. But what does that really mean, right? Just because I'm using my hands and trying to give you an understanding of what that means, do you necessarily understand that? Each one of us uses input we receive from our senses in order to make sense of and navigate the world around us. This simply means that we use our vision and hearing and smell and taste and touch, as well as our invisible senses that tell us where our body is in space in order to interact with the world by walking and talking and listening and eating and even listening to and watching this video on your computer screen, right? Sensory processing is really crucial to our everyday lives. Now, these systems can sometimes fall out of sync though, and either it's due to environmental conditions, genetics, or other challenges. Maybe you're overfunctioning, who knows? But either way, I want you to be able to understand the basis of what sensory processing is before we move into how that sensory processing gets used into the behaviors. I call it the behaviors of our brain, right? It's input, we process it, and then there is an output, which I will go into a little bit later. But the most important thing to understand is that output is the behavior of our brain. Now, trouble with these systems can cause difficulties with how we relate and perceive the world around us and how we interact with one another and within the world itself. Now I'm going to give you a short description of difficulties people have when each system isn't working quite right. First, we're going to talk about the visual system. Trouble with visual processing can often lead to visual perceptual issues, including paying less attention to relevant visual information, sloppy handwriting, and difficulty distinguishing shapes and sizes of objects. This is really crucial when we think about scanning the world around us from our visual lens. Are we observing and able to see the world around us? The auditory system, when there's difficulty in distinguishing sounds, there's also often delayed or impaired understanding responses to things said and trouble knowing what sounds to pay attention to. So sometimes we have individuals who are really sensitive to sound, like when the TV's blaring really loud and you're really frustrated after a long day of work and you really want silence, or some others may have issues when they're getting their name called and they don't hear it. Now, smell and taste, I'm gonna kind of lump together. And oversensitivity to different tastes, seeking out smells, trouble distinguishing tastes and temperatures of food, right? Maybe you really don't like strong scents, or maybe you really crave them. Maybe you don't love strong tasting food, or maybe you really crave them, right? Spices, yeah? This all has to do with your individual makeup of your nervous system and how your individual system processes that information. Now, our tactile system is a sense developed very early on in life and has connected in the brain to feeling of comfort and safety. Difficulties with this system can result in less awareness of textures, meaning you don't really feel the tags in your clothing, or you don't really care. It's totally fine. But hypersensitivity to textures and touch, which sometimes means we've got some things going on in other areas like picky eaters, or seeking tactile sensation, right? Think of playing with water when washing hands and drinking, right? You can either really, really crave lots of texture, or you can really not like a lot of texture. Let's dive into proprioception, which is sensed by your muscles and joints and help you to determine where your body is in space. Now, I want you to do something for me. I want you to close your eyes. Go ahead, do it. It is totally okay. And I want you to touch your fingers to your nose. Were you able to do this without being able to see either your fingers or your nose, right? This is because of proprioception, right? It is understanding where your body is in space. Now I'm going to move on to the vestibular system. This system relies on bones and fluid in the inner ear and detects our direction of movement, changes in gravity, vibrations, and the relationship between head position to the rest of the body. It is closely linked with vision and hearing. And when the vestibular system isn't working quite right, it can result in like dizziness, fear of sudden movement, or heights, and muscles that seem loose and floppy or weak, but more flexible. Now that I've gone through all 8 of the senses, I want to break down once again how sensory processing happens, okay? Number 1, okay, there is a sensory input. Your body receives information through our 8 senses: taste, touch, sound, light, okay? Then our brain takes that information in and we process that information. It is organized and interpreted within our brain, stored, and sometimes and often related to previously experienced events that have happened in your life. So it's basically like coding. Okay, I like to say that our brain is all of the time coding, just like the motherboard of a computer. Now, after our brain processes it and organizes it and stores it, we then have a response. And I call that response the language of our brain, right? This is when your sensory receptors get stimulated and your body decides, let's say, whether to go into action or to remain calm, or whether to have a response or maybe not a response at all. Maybe they dislike the stimuli. Maybe they really enjoy the stimuli. But either way, there is a response. Now, all of this happens naturally. Usually, you don't even know that this is happening or that it exists. Our brain is that brilliant that it does it naturally for us. But when you do not have the awareness of how your brain and body is recognizing these sensory processing stimuli, if they don't understand how to process it, right? If they, meaning your brain, does not understand how to process it and you aren't feeling it, there is no humanly way possible for you to be able to support your brain when your brain doesn't like something, or when your brain is fearful of something, or when your brain has a memory of a traumatic event that we want to heal. Now, why is this important, right? How we process our senses has a huge role in how we function. It influences how we learn, how we feel, and how we develop. Our environment is constantly throwing stimuli at us, right? You jump because you hear a loud sound behind you, right? And being able to appropriately process and respond to those stimuli is absolutely essential for moving through life. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit just for a second about the idea of sensory processing disorder. Now, this is not a recognized disorder in the DSM. And don't get me started on the DSM because it could be a whole nother video and we will probably do that eventually. But I want to discuss with you what it is. Sensory processing disorder is when the brain has difficulty receiving, right? And then responding to the information that comes in through the 8 senses. I find personally that we all have a little bit of dysfunction, if you will, or we all have a different sensory system that makes up the whole of who we are. And instead of looking at it as a disorder, I want you to take a look at it rather as individuality. Some may have more high needs than others. We may need to support more children differently than others. We may need to support our individual nervous system more than others. I personally know that my nervous system is highly sensitive. And so I have learned to cope and do things that will support my own nervous system and therefore will keep me regulated and supportive rather than dysregulated, which we can talk about the difference between regulation and dysregulation in another video. But it helps keep me regulated so that I know how my body is responding. I know how to support my brain and body, and I can feel when I like something or I dislike something. Now, how do you know if you have, let's call them issues, or let's say struggles, right? With sensory processing, right? Most people can process senses, like I said, without even thinking about it. We engage in activities that we like, which engages our senses just enough to make us happy and keep us interested and engaged. But we all have different thresholds of stimulation. And for some senses, it may be on the higher end. And for some, it may be on the lower end. For children and adults with a sensory processing, let's call it discrepancy, struggle, issue, whatever you'd like to call it, they tend to be more on either the extreme side of needing and craving stimuli into their body or avoiding, pushing all that stimuli away. And then those individuals have really big reactions and the behaviors, right? We organize it, and then there's a behavior. Those individuals tend to have more extreme behaviors of how we respond to stimuli. This does not just relate to children. We all as adults can relate to this as well because we all have individual specific brains. Understanding the responses of sensory processing, the behaviors and language of your brain is super important. So I want you to stick around for the next video, which I will discuss all about our responses of sensory processing and how it can look in different humans. Now, many of you have reached out recently and asked me where you put the questions for me. You know where I want you to put them? Right down below in the comments. I want you to let me know if you have any questions about what I have spoken about today, if you have any questions on any videos I have not done in the past or that you would like to see. And if you want to know more and you think that I might already have a video on that, I want you to type in the search bar my name in YouTube and some really key words on what you are looking for and those phrases so that that video will pop up. I cannot thank you enough for joining today. I hope that you have learned a little bit. I am going to give you little nuggets of information so that you can take the time, process it, and understand it for the long haul of your future, right? I want you to be able to understand what is under the hood of the car. And also, I don't want you to forget to subscribe to my channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.